I'm 34 years old, and I thought I could just endure it all to keep the peace at home. Until the night I drove to visit my aunt, the only person who dared to name the evil my family pretended not to see. When my stepfather's fist connected with my face for daring to associate with that woman, I understood. Fear saves no one, but evidence does. And my aunt, she'd been planning for years, a clean legal plan that would demolish everything he'd built on lies. My name is Lena Hart, and after a 12-hour shift at Northbridge Children's Center, all I wanted was to drop off some medication and groceries for Aunt May before heading home. The compliance reports could wait until morning. The audit findings would still be there, but May's arthritis wouldn't wait, and neither would her empty fridge. The drive back to my mother's house, I still couldn't call it home, not with Calvin there, took 23 minutes. I counted every one of them on the dashboard clock, watching the familiar streets of Greyhaven blur past in the November darkness. My scrubs still smelled like antiseptic and the lavender lotion we used in the pediatric ward. Calvin was waiting in the kitchen. I knew it the moment I stepped through the back door, the particular quality of silence that meant he'd been drinking and stewing. My mother stood by the sink, her hands wrapped around a dish rag like it was a lifeline. "Where were you?" His voice came low and controlled, the tone that used to make me freeze as a teenager. "Work ran late. I texted Mom." I set my keys on the counter, careful to keep my movements calm. "Don't lie to me." He rose from the kitchen table, all 6'3" of him, still wearing his Harvest Chapel polo shirt from whatever committee meeting he'd graced with his presence today. "Mrs. Coleman saw you at May's place. That woman is poison to this family, and I've made it clear. She's my aunt, Mom's sister." The words came out before I could stop them. 20 years of silence, and now, at 34, I was finally too tired to swallow them back. "She's a troublemaker who can't keep her nose out of other people's business." His hand slammed on the granite countertop. "Spreading lies, questioning things that aren't her concern. I won't have you." "She needed groceries, Calvin, her prescriptions, that's all." "That's all?" He moved faster than a man his size should be able to. One shove sent me backward into the kitchen island, my hip catching the corner hard enough to steal my breath. "You think I'm stupid? Think I don't know she's been filling your head with her paranoid conspiracies?" My mother's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Calvin, please, she just—" "Shut up, Ruth." I tasted copper before I felt the sting, his backhand catching my mouth as I tried to straighten up. Not a closed fist? Not technically. Calvin was always careful about technicalities. "You want to choose her over this family? Over everything I've provided?" He loomed over me, breath sour with bourbon and righteousness. "Get out of my sight, and if I hear you've been back to that woman's house, you'll find out what real consequences look like." I fled upstairs, my hands shaking as I locked the bathroom door behind me. In the mirror, my lower lip was already swelling, a thin line of blood marking where it had split against my teeth. I pulled out my phone, angling it to catch the damage in the harsh vanity lighting. Click, evidence. Through the thin floor, I could hear him still ranting. My phone recorded it all. The threats, the accusations, my mother's tearful attempts to calm him. 3 minutes and 47 seconds of Calvin Rockwell showing his true face, the one hidden from his congregation and charity boards. I pressed a washcloth to my lip and sat on the closed toilet lid, scrolling through my contacts to May's number. The text I sent was simple. "He knows I was there. It's getting worse." Her response came immediately. "Document everything. The time is coming." Later, after Calvin had stormed off to his study and my mother had retreated to their bedroom, I sat in my childhood room and stared at the photo on my phone. Such a small injury, really. Nothing that wouldn't heal in a week. Nothing that would even raise eyebrows if I said I'd walked into a door. But I knew, and May knew, and somewhere in her house was a valise full of evidence that would matter far more than a split lip. The question that burned in my chest, hot as the shame of being 34 and still here, still taking this. What was Calvin so afraid May had found? The answer, I suspected, was worth far more than tonight's violence. And if I was finally angry enough to find out, then maybe, just maybe, I was angry enough to do something about it. May's house smelled like cinnamon tea and old paper. She'd been waiting for me. The kitchen table already cleared except for a leather valise that looked like it had seen better decades. The swelling in my lip had gone down enough that I could speak without lisping. But May's eyes still narrowed when she saw me. "He hit you, not a question." "Backhanded. There's a difference. Apparently." I sat across from her, wrapping my hands around the mug she pushed my way. "He found out I was here Tuesday." "Good." I blinked. "Good?" "Means he's scared. Scared men make mistakes." May's fingers drummed once on the valise. "I've been waiting for the right moment. Lena, for you to be ready. Getting hit might not be pleasant, but it's clarifying, isn't it?" She was right. The fog of 20 years, of keeping peace, of making excuses, of believing things would get better, had lifted the moment I tasted blood. "Tell me what you found." May smiled, sharp as winter. "I didn't find anything. That's what made Calvin so angry. I documented what was already there." She opened the valise with practiced efficiency. 5 years ago, I was doing part-time bookkeeping for Harvest Chapel, volunteer work, Christian duty, until I noticed discrepancies. She spread papers across the table like dealing cards, bank statements, authorization forms, photocopied checks, screenshots of digital transfers. Small at first, a few thousand here and there, reimbursements for contractors who didn't exist, supplies that were never delivered. Her finger traced a path through the documents. But Calvin got greedy, or maybe desperate. The amounts grew. The schemes got elaborate. I picked up a statement, my compliance-trained eye catching the patterns immediately. "These withdrawals, they're just under the reporting threshold. Every time. And look here." She showed me a series of authorizations. "See the signatures? Calvin, of course. But also Jim Morrison, the board treasurer. Except Jim's been in assisted living for 2 years. Dementia. He's signing for someone who can't consent?" With a wife who trusts the good pastor implicitly, May's voice could have frozen hell. "But that's just the appetizer. Here's the main course." She pulled out a folder marked with last year's date. Inside were documents that made my breath catch. Loan applications, mortgage refinancing papers, all for church property. $1.2 million, borrowed against the church buildings and land. May watched my face. "The congregation doesn't know. The board doesn't know. But guess whose name appears as the guarantor? And guess which LLC received the funds?" "Rockwell Outreach." I read it off the incorporation documents. "Calvin's company. His mission work, his charity operations, his special projects that somehow never quite materialized into anything the IRS could track." May gathered the papers with careful hands. $2.47 million in total, over 5 years, minimum. I sat back, the scope of it washing over me. This is federal crime territory. Which is why he's so terrified of me. Why he's forbidden contact. Why he's kept your mother isolated and dependent. She locked eyes with me. "But here's what Calvin doesn't understand about women like us. We don't need fists. We need process." From the bottom of the valise, she pulled out a thumb drive and a printed document. "Everything's digitized, backed up in 3 locations. This," she tapped the document, "is a whistleblower report template, ready to file with the State Attorney General's office. But we need to be smart about this. We need corroboration, independent verification." My mind was already working, the procedures falling into place. "The church needs to request an external audit, which they won't do if Calvin asks them not to. But they might if concerned members raise questions, anonymous tips, specific concerns that demand investigation." I met her smile with one of my own. "I write compliance reports for a living. May, I know exactly how to phrase concerns that can't be ignored. There's my girl." She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "Three-pronged approach. First, We get the church board to call for an independent audit. Second, we file reports with the proper authorities, state attorney, IRS, everyone with jurisdiction. Third, we make sure Calvin can't run, can't liquidate assets or destroy evidence. I thought about the split lip, the recording on my phone. Restraining order. Document the abuse. Make it part of the public record. May nodded slowly. You don't need to hit back. Lena, you need to hit correctly, legally, publicly, in ways that matter. We spent the next 2 hours planning, every step documented, every move calculated. By the time I left, the valise was lighter. I carried copies of everything, encrypted and secure. The bruise on my hip throbbed as I walked to my car, but for the first time in 20 years, it felt like a battle scar rather than a badge of shame. Calvin thought he'd won by keeping us afraid and separated. He didn't understand that May had spent 5 years turning fear into fuel, gathering evidence like ammunition, and now he'd given us the perfect catalyst, his own violence, documented and undeniable. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and we wouldn't need to throw a single punch. The compliance department at Northbridge Children's Center ran on precision, every medication documented, every protocol followed, every deviation investigated. I lived in that world 8 to 12 hours a day, and now I was about to apply its ruthless logic to Calvin's house of cards. During my lunch break, I created a new email account from a coffee shop Wi-Fi 3 blocks from the hospital, nothing traceable to my work or personal devices. The address was clinical. Concerned. Member. HC 224 Edge. Proton Mail. Com. My first email went to all 7 members of Harvest Chapel's Board of Elders. I'd memorized their names from the church website. Public information, all of it. The subject line read, Request for Financial Transparency Review. Time sensitive. The body was pure compliance language. Dear board members, as stakeholders in Harvest Chapel's mission, we write to request an immediate independent financial audit. The following concerns require urgent attention. 1. Contractor reimbursements, totaling $7,200 to entities without verified tax identification numbers. 2. Withdrawal patterns consistently below federal reporting thresholds, $9,900 repeated transactions. 3. Unauthorized refinancing of church property without congregational vote, as required by Section 14.3 of Church Bylaws. 4. Discrepancies between reported charitable disbursements and verified recipient acknowledgments. Per IRS guidelines for 501c3 organizations, these patterns require investigation within 72 hours of board notification to maintain tax-exempt status. We trust the board will act with appropriate urgency to protect the church's legal standing and fiduciary responsibility. Respectfully. Concerned members. I attached 3 documents. Public records May had pulled showing the property liens, screenshots of the church's own financial reports with the questionable line items highlighted, and a timeline of transactions. Nothing that wasn't already public, nothing that could be traced to May's inside knowledge, just enough to demand action. The second email went to the State Attorney General's office, their nonprofit division. Similar content, but with legal citations, Form 990 violations, potential private inurement, the kind of terms that made lawyers salivate. Back at work, I built my tracking system, a spreadsheet that looked like patient compliance data, but was actually monitoring email opens, response times, and next steps. I'd learned from the best. Every investigation needed a paper trail. Dr. Morrison found me updating charts at the nurses' station. Lena, you look focused today. Just making sure all our ducks are in a row for the state inspection next month. Not a lie, I was very concerned about inspections. By 3 p.m., the first domino fell. Jim Morrison Jr., the board treasurer's son, had replied to the anonymous email. This is deeply concerning. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for Sunday. My father hasn't been able to fulfill his duties for some time, and I've been worried about oversight. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. I forwarded his response to May with a single word. Beginning. The state AG's office generated an automatic case number. I documented that too. That evening, I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage and made a different kind of list. Every bruise Calvin had left over the years, every threat I could remember, the police reports that were never filed because good Christian families handle things privately, the isolation from friends, the financial control. My phone had 43 audio recordings saved, some just minutes of his ranting, others captured worse. I uploaded them all to 3 different cloud services, then emailed the links to May and to the new secure account. The domestic violence hotline counselor was patient and thorough. "You don't have to wait until it gets worse," she said. "What you're describing is already abuse." "I know. I'm a healthcare worker. I know the statistics." My voice stayed steady, clinical. "I need to file for an emergency protective order. What's the process?" She walked me through it, the forms I'd need, the evidence that would help, the courthouse hours, how to stay safe during the process. By the time I drove home, late, deliberately late, after Calvin would be in his study with his bourbon, I had a timeline. 72 hours until the board meeting, 48 hours to file the restraining order, 24 hours before Calvin would start noticing the walls closing in. Mom was waiting in the kitchen, pretending to read a magazine. "You're home late again." "Big inspection coming up, lots of prep work." I grabbed water from the fridge, noting how she flinched when I moved too fast. "How was your day?" "Fine. Calvin's stressed about Sunday's service. Something about the board wanting to meet." I kept my face neutral. "Oh, what about?" "Financial review." He said, "Routine stuff. But you know how he likes everything perfect." Perfect. That was one word for it. "I'm sure it'll be fine," I said, heading for the stairs. Calvin's very thorough with his record keeping. In my room, I opened my laptop and checked the tracking sheet. 2 more board members had responded. The state AG had assigned a caseworker. The domestic violence forms were downloaded and half completed. Compliance work wasn't about emotion. It wasn't about revenge or justice or making things right. It was about process, documentation, following procedures until the weight of evidence became undeniable. Calvin had built his empire on the assumption that good Christian wives and daughters stayed quiet. That family shame was worse than family crimes. That his collar and committee positions were shields against consequence. He was about to learn what happened when someone who understood systems decided to use them. 72 hours. The clock was ticking. Saturday morning started with Calvin's fist on my bedroom door. Family breakfast, downstairs, now. I'd learned to sleep fully dressed these past few nights. Phone charged, keys in my pocket, ready to leave at a moment's notice. The restraining order paperwork was hidden in my work locker, waiting for Monday's courthouse opening. The kitchen smelled like bacon and tension. Mom stood at the stove, her movements mechanical. Calvin sat at the head of the table, wearing his weekend casual that still looked pressed and calculated. "Sit." He didn't look up from his phone. "We need to discuss your behavior." I sat, recorded, waited. "This divisiveness stops now." He set his phone down with deliberate force. "May Ellison has been poisoning this family for years with her jealousy and lies. You will write her a letter, today, formally ending your relationship. I'll review it before it's sent." "Why?" "Keep him talking. Get it on record." "Because I said so. Because I'm the head of this household. Because your mother agrees it's for the best." He glanced at Mom, who nodded without turning from the stove. "Don't you, Ruth?" "Yes, family unity is important." Her voice was hollow. "Furthermore," Calvin continued, "you'll be joining me at tomorrow's service. Visible, supportive. The board has called some ridiculous meeting about finances, and I need my family presenting a united front." My phone buzzed. I glanced down to see a text from an unknown number. "State AG investigation confirmed. Audit team contacted. J.M. Jr." Calvin's hand slammed the table. "Are you listening to me?" "Every word." I hit save on the recording. "You want me to cut off my aunt and perform happy family at church while you're under financial investigation?" The silence stretched like a held breath. Mom's spatula clattered against the pan. "What did you say?" His voice had gone deadly quiet. "The emergency board meeting. It's about financial irregularities, isn't it?" I kept my tone conversational. "Must be serious if they're bringing in external auditors." "How do you—" He caught himself. "You know nothing about church business." "I know about compliance, about what triggers emergency reviews." I met his stare. "Patterns just below reporting thresholds. Unauthorized loans against property, ghost contractors, the kind of things that make board members panic about losing tax-exempt status." "You little—" He started to rise. "I also know about documentation." I held up my phone. 44 recordings now, photos of injuries, a paper trail that would fascinate investigators. Mom finally turned. "Lena, what are you doing?" "What I should have done years ago." I stood, keeping the table between Calvin and me. "I'm 34 years old, and I'm done pretending this is normal. Done watching you pretend it's normal." "You ungrateful—" Calvin's face had gone purple. "After everything I've done for this family." "You mean the house Mom inherited from Grandma? The car that's in her name? The lifestyle funded by money you stole from people who trusted you?" I backed toward the door. "Tell me, Calvin, which shell company did this month's winter relief fund go to?" He lunged. I was ready this time, dodging sideways as his weight carried him into the counter. Mom screamed. I ran. Out the back door, across the yard, into my car with the locks clicking before he made it off the porch. My hands shook as I started the engine, but my voice was steady when May answered. "It's accelerating. He knows something's happening." "Where are you?" "Leaving the house. He tried to—" "I got it recorded." I pulled into traffic, checking mirrors. "The board meeting is tomorrow. Jim Morrison Jr. confirmed the AG is investigating." "Good. Come here. We'll review everything one more time." May. Mom saw everything. She just stood there. "She's stood there for 20 years, honey. That's not changing tonight." Her voice gentled. "But after tomorrow, she won't have to pretend anymore. None of us will." I drove toward May's house, my phone lighting up with calls from Calvin's number, then Mom's, then unknown numbers that were probably Calvin using church phones. I let them all go to voicemail. More evidence for the file. The letter he wanted me to write? I'd write it, but not to May. To the board, to the congregation, to the investigators who would soon be combing through every financial record Calvin had touched. I'd write it all down, clear and clinical and devastating. The performance he wanted at church? He'd get that too, just not the version he expected. Family unity was important, which was exactly why it was time to show everyone what our unity had really cost. Sunday dawn broke gray and unforgiving. May's guest room had become my command center. Laptop open, phone charging, documents spread across the quilt in neat piles. The external auditor had worked through Saturday night. Jim Morrison Jr. kept us updated through encrypted messages. "They've sealed the church office," May read from her phone. "All computers, all files. The auditor found enough in the first 6 hours to trigger full forensic accounting." I pulled up the spreadsheet I'd been building. 2.47 million confirmed so far. Look at this pattern. Every withdrawal links to one of 3 shell companies: Rockwell Outreach, Greyhaven Community Services, Faith Forward Initiative, all registered to the same P.O. box. "Which Calvin pays for with church funds," May smiled grimly. "Recursive fraud. He's using stolen money to maintain the infrastructure for stealing money." My phone buzzed. "Mom," again. This time I answered. "Lena, you have to come home. Calvin he's destroying things. Says if you don't show up at church." "Call 911, Mom." "I can't. You know I can't. Just come home, please." I put her on speaker. "Mom, I need you to listen carefully. There are investigators at the church right now. Federal investigators. They have Calvin's financial records. All of them." Silence. Then, "What did you do?" "What you've been too scared to do for 20 years. I kept my voice level. "It's over. The theft, the threats, all of it. By tonight, Everyone will know exactly who Calvin Rockwell really is. You don't understand. A crash in the background. Calvin's voice, roaring. Then the line went dead. May was already calling 911, reporting a domestic disturbance at the address. I saved the call recording and added it to the file. By 9 a.m., the church parking lot was fuller than usual. Word had spread. Emergency meeting, financial crisis, Pastor Calvin under investigation. The faithful came to gawk, disguised as support. May and I arrived separately. I wore my most conservative dress, hair pulled back, makeup covering the fading bruise on my lip, the perfect image of a dutiful daughter, if you didn't look too close at the steel in my spine. Inside, Calvin stood at the front, working the crowd. His politician smile never wavered, but I could see the sweat beading at his temples. Mom sat in the front row, rigid as a mannequin. Testing. Jim Morrison Jr. adjusted the podium microphone. Other board members filed onto the platform. If everyone could take their seats, we need to begin. Calvin tried to step forward. I'd like to open with prayer. That won't be necessary. Jim's voice carried new authority. This is a financial meeting, not a service. Please sit with your family. Calvin. The walk to that front pew seemed to last forever. Calvin's hand clamped on my elbow as I passed. You did this, he hissed. No, I pulled free. You did this. I just documented it. Jim cleared his throat. Members of Harvest Chapel, we've called this emergency meeting to address serious financial irregularities discovered in our church accounts. As of yesterday afternoon, we've engaged Brennan Forensic Accounting to conduct a full audit. Murmurs rippled through the congregation. Calvin started to stand. 2 board members shifted, subtly blocking him. Their preliminary findings are disturbing. Jim clicked a remote. The projection screen lit up with spreadsheets. In the past 5 years, approximately $2.47 million designated for church ministries have been diverted to unauthorized accounts. The murmurs became gasps. Someone in the back started crying. Furthermore, Jim continued, we've discovered that church property was leveraged for loans totaling $1.2 million without board knowledge or congregational approval. These funds were transferred to companies that exist only on paper, all controlled by a single individual. This is persecution, Calvin shot to his feet. Lies spread by jealous. We have documentation. A woman stood in the middle section, the external auditor. Bank records, signed authorizations, digital transfers with IP addresses tracked to church computers. Would you like me to display them? Please do, Jim said. The next slides were devastating. Calvin's signature on every document, timestamps showing transfers made during church hours, the shell company registrations with his barely disguised ownership. I felt my phone vibrate. A text from an unknown number. State prosecutor in parking lot, local PD en route, AG office. Calvin must have sensed the net closing. He spun toward me, face contorted. You vindictive little... Mr. Rockwell, a man in a suit stepped from the back row. I'm Detective Morrison with the Financial Crimes Unit. We need you to come with us. I'm not going anywhere. Calvin grabbed for the podium. This is my church. These people need to hear... Sir, we can do this quietly or... Calvin lunged off the platform, straight at me, but I'd been documenting his patterns for days. I sidestepped, letting his momentum carry him into the pews. When he scrambled up, swinging wild, I was already moving, my phone capturing every second. The handcuffs clicked with a sound like communion bells. As they led him out, Calvin locked eyes with me one last time. You destroyed this family. No, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I documented this family. There's a difference. The church sat in stunned silence. Mom hadn't moved, hadn't even turned to watch. But May stood in the back, tears streaming down her face, not grief, relief. Jim Morrison Jr. cleared his throat. The board has voted to cooperate fully with all investigations. We'll be liquidating assets to repay what was stolen, and we'll be implementing new oversight to ensure this never happens again. I filed out with the others. past the investigators boxing up evidence, past the news van pulling into the parking lot, past 20 years of enforced silence finally breaking apart. Tomorrow, I'd file the restraining order, the state would file charges, the IRS would begin their own investigation, the dominoes would fall in perfect sequence, each one documented and verified. But today, in this moment, I stood in the November air and breathed free. The Greyhaven Public Library's small conference room had never hosted a war council before. May and I had commandeered it for 3 hours, transforming the space into what she called Litigation Central. My laptop displayed our presentation. Clean slides, no emotion, just facts arranged like bullets. Remember, May adjusted her reading glasses. We're not appealing to their hearts. Hearts got them into this mess. Trusting a man because he quoted scripture. We're appealing to their wallets and their legal liability. I nodded, reviewing my notes one final time. Timeline of transactions, statutory violations, personal liability exposure for board members who should have provided oversight. The nuclear option is slide 23. Potential loss of tax-exempt status, retroactive 5 years. That would bankrupt them personally. May's smile was sharp. Good. Maybe next time, they'll remember that trust requires verification. We'd sent registered letters to all board members, the senior pastor who'd been conveniently absent during Calvin's tenure, and 3 major donors whose names appeared on the questionable transactions. The meeting was set for 7 p.m., public, documented, no room for backroom deals. My phone buzzed. A text from the prosecutor. Bail hearing tomorrow. RO approved. Served this afternoon. Stay vigilant. Calvin was out on bond, but the restraining order meant he couldn't come within 500 feet of me. May, or Mom, not that Mom was speaking to either of us. She'd moved in with her prayer group leader, telling anyone who'd listen that we'd destroyed a good man. By 6:45, the library meeting room was packed, board members in the front row, looking like they'd aged a decade in a week, reporters from the Greyhaven Gazette in the back, church members scattered throughout, some supportive, others glaring like we'd burned down the sanctuary. Jim Morrison, Jr. called the meeting to order. Thank you all for coming. Ms. Hart and Ms. Ellison have prepared a presentation on next steps for financial recovery. I stood, clicking to the first slide. Good evening. What we're discussing tonight isn't about faith or forgiveness. It's about mathematics and legal obligations. Click. Total confirmed diverted funds, $2,476,892. Click. Additional liabilities from unauthorized property leverage, $0.2 million. Click. Estimated penalties and interest if tax-exempt status is revoked, $3.4 million. A board member in the front row made a choking sound. However, I continued, there's a path forward that minimizes damage to the church while maximizing recovery. May took over, her teacher's voice carrying easily. Phase 1. Asset recovery through civil litigation. Calvin Rockwell's personal assets include 2 rental properties, investment accounts, and 3 vehicles, all purchased during the time frame of the theft. Forensic accounting shows direct fund transfers. You can't prove. Someone started from the middle rows. We can. I clicked to the evidence slide. Digital banking records show transfers from Rockwell Outreach LLC to Calvin's personal accounts, then immediate purchases. The legal term is fraudulent conveyance. Recovery rate in similar cases, 60 to 80%. May picked up seamlessly. Phase 2. Insurance claims. The church carries directors' and officers' liability insurance. With proper documentation of the board's lack of oversight, we can file claims for up to $2 million in coverage. 4 hours. Phase 3, I resumed. Negotiated settlements with complicit parties. 3 vendors received inflated payments in exchange for kickbacks. 2 have already indicated willingness to repay rather than face prosecution. The room had gone very quiet. Even the reporters had stopped typing. Total projected recovery, $2.1 to $2.8 million within 18 months. Click to the final slide. Enough to satisfy the property liens and maintain operations while implementing new controls. What about criminal restitution? Jim asked. Parallel track. The prosecutor will seek full restitution, but criminal cases move slowly. Civil recovery is faster. I closed the laptop. The choice is simple. Act now with civil litigation, or wait years for criminal proceedings while the church bleeds assets. An older woman stood up. This is all so cold. Where's the compassion? Where's forgiveness? May's voice gentled, but her words stayed sharp. Compassion is ensuring the food bank stays funded. Forgiveness doesn't mean avoiding consequences. And coldness? She gestured to the slides. Mathematics has no temperature. It simply is. The vote was unanimous. The board authorized immediate civil action, insurance claims, and vendor negotiations. They also voted to hire an independent compliance officer, a position they offered to me on the spot. I declined. Conflict of interest, but I'll provide all documentation to whoever you hire. As the meeting dispersed, a young mother approached. My family depended on the children's program Calvin cut. Thank you for doing this the right way, with facts, not fury. Outside, May and I sat in her car, exhaustion hitting like a wave. Think it'll work? She asked. The math works, the law works, the process works. I watched the last board member drive away. Calvin thought he was untouchable because he controlled the narrative, but narratives are just stories. Spreadsheets are truth. My phone lit up with a notification. An email from the forensic accountant, marked urgent. I opened it, then showed May. They found another account, offshore, another $400,000. May laughed, actually laughed. Of course they did. Men like Calvin always have one more secret. Good thing we built in a margin of error. I forwarded the email to the prosecutor and the board. Process, not passion. Evidence, not emotion. Tomorrow would bring more discoveries, more paperwork, more careful documentation, but tonight we'd laid out the roadmap, clean, legal, inevitable. Calvin had counted on silence and shame. He'd gambled on emotional manipulation and community pressure. He'd lost to something far more powerful, two women who understood that revenge was just another word for accounting. Sunday arrived like a reckoning. The parking lot of Harvest Chapel overflowed by 9:30, cars lining the street in both directions. Word had spread through Greyhaven like wildfire. Calvin Rockwell would be there, despite bail conditions, despite everything. His lawyer had found a loophole. The restraining order didn't specifically mention the church. May and I arrived early, taking seats in the middle section where we could see everything. I wore a wire, courtesy of the prosecutor's office. May carried a folder thick with documents, copies of everything, ready to distribute if needed. He's going to make a scene, May murmured. I'm counting on it. I checked my phone. The prosecutor, 2 detectives, and a court reporter sat 3 rows back. Jim Morrison, Jr., had reluctantly agreed to let Calvin speak. Better to have it documented than to fuel his martyr complex. The sanctuary filled. Some came to support Calvin, others to witness his fall. Mom sat in the front row, back rigid, wearing the pearl necklace Calvin had given her last Christmas, paid for, I now knew, with money meant for the youth ministry. At exactly 10 a.m., Calvin strode in through the side door. His suit was immaculate, his Bible leather-bound and prominent. He took the pulpit like he owned it, which, technically, he no longer did. My brothers and sisters, he began, voice carrying that practiced resonance. I come before you as Paul came before the Sanhedrin, accused, persecuted, but unbowed. Someone in the back said, Amen. Most stayed silent. Forces of division have attacked this church, attacked me, attacked the very foundation of what we've built together. His eyes found me, led by those who should show gratitude, who instead choose destruction. I felt May tense beside me. I touched her arm. Wait. Calvin warmed to his theme, voice rising. They speak of money as if it matters more than souls. They bring worldly accountants to judge heavenly work. They dare to question how the Lord's resources were used for the Lord's purposes. Show them, I said, just loud enough to carry. Jim Morrison, Jr. stood. Since you've raised the subject, Calvin, perhaps you'd like to explain these particular Lord's purposes. He clicked a remote. The projector came alive. Not slides this time. Photographs. Calvin's boat. Purchased 3 days after a missions fund withdrawal. His vacation home. Bought the same week as the canceled summer camp. His wife's jewelry. Calvin's motorcycles. The country club membership. Turn that off. Calvin gripped the pulpit. Or this one. Jim clicked again. Security footage from the church office. Timestamp visible. Calvin at the computer. Transferring funds. Strange hours for the Lord's work. 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. The congregation stirred. Whispers became murmurs, became voices. This is persecution. Calvin's mask slipped, showing the rage beneath. I gave everything to this church. My time, my talent, and approximately $2.4 million of our tithes, someone called out. You dare. Calvin stepped from behind the pulpit. After all I've done? The programs I've created? The lives I've touched? Which programs? May stood, her teacher's voice cutting through. The food bank you defunded? The counseling service you canceled? Or the youth ministry whose budget went to your boat? Sit down, you bitter woman. No, I stood too. We're done sitting down, done being quiet, done pretending theft is leadership and abuse is authority. Calvin's face went purple. Abuse? I've never laid a hand. March 15th, 2019, June 8th, 2021, November 2nd, 2023, and Tuesday of last week, I held up my phone. All documented, all recorded, all reported. The prosecutor stood. Mr. Rockwell, you're in violation of your bail conditions by attempting to intimidate witnesses. I'm preaching, Calvin roared. This is my church. No, Jim Morrison, Jr. said quietly. It's not. The board voted. The congregation affirmed. You've been removed from all positions, effective immediately. Calvin lunged toward the board section. You spineless! 2 officers moved faster, intercepting him mid-stride. The handcuffs came out again, this time in full view of everyone. You'll regret this. Calvin struggled against the restraints. All of you. When this church fails without me. Actually, I said, loud and clear, the recovery plan projects us debt-free in 18 months. Your replacement starts Monday. We've already received $400,000 in insurance settlements. They dragged him past my pew. For a moment, our eyes met. Why? He snarled. Why couldn't you just stay quiet? Because quiet was killing us. I held his gaze. And because someone taught me that documentation beats desperation every time. That was you, Calvin. Every time you recorded your threats, thinking you were showing power. Every time you signed those fraudulent documents, believing you were untouchable. You taught me exactly how to destroy you. The officers pulled him away. The church doors closed with a final thud. In the silence that followed, Mom finally turned around. Her face was wet with tears, but for the first time in 20 years, her eyes were clear. I need to speak with my daughter, she said, and my sister. We have a lot to discuss. The congregation began to disperse. Some stopped to thank us. Others left quickly, unable to process the collapse of their idol. Jim Morrison, Jr. announced grief counseling would be available, along with financial planning sessions for those whose giving had been impacted. May squeezed my hand. It's over. The criminal trial starts in 3 months, I reminded her. I mean the fear, the silence, the pretending. She smiled through her tears. That's over. As we walked out together, May, Mom, and me, I felt the weight of 20 years lifting behind us. Harvest Chapel stood ready for resurrection. Ahead, Calvin faced a federal courtroom where charm couldn't overcome evidence. The parking lot was emptying. The November sun broke through the clouds, and somewhere in the distance, sirens faded as they carried Calvin toward his reckoning. Justice. It turned out, sounded exactly like a spreadsheet being projected on a sanctuary wall while a corrupt man realized his own receipts had become his judgment. The conference room at the district attorney's office smelled like old coffee and justice. Through the window, I could see Harvest Chapel's steeple catching the afternoon light. 6 months had passed since Calvin's arrest. Today, we were finishing what we'd started. Sign here, here, and initial here. The ADA slid papers across the table. With your testimony and the documentary evidence, he's agreed to plead guilty to all charges, 15 to 20 years, no possibility of early parole for the first 10. I signed. May signed. Even Mom signed. Her hand steady now. The restitution order is for the full amount, the ADA continued. His assets are frozen. The church will recover approximately $1.8 million after liquidation. What about the others? May asked. His accomplices? Morrison's son-in-law pled guilty to conspiracy. 18 months. The vendors settled civilly and are cooperating. She closed the file. It's as clean as these cases get. In the hallway afterward, we stood in a circle of quiet victory. Mom spoke first. I've been seeing a therapist. She says I have a lot to unpack. She managed a small smile. 20 years of looking the other way leaves marks. We all have marks, I said. But we're here. We're free. That matters. May pulled out her phone. Jim Morrison Jr. just texted. The youth program reopened last week. 40 kids enrolled. The food bank served 300 families this month. The new pastor, she's good. Lena, really good. We walked out together into the spring afternoon. The courthouse steps where Calvin had done his perp walk were just concrete now. No ghosts remaining. I need to tell you both something, I said. I got a job offer. Senior Compliance Director at Children's Medical Network in Portland. I'm taking it. Mom's face fell, then lifted. Good. You need to build your own life, not spend it cleaning up ours. But I'll visit, I added quickly. And May? They need a part-time bookkeeping instructor at the community college there. Already applied, May grinned. Figured you might need backup on your next adventure. We stood there, 3 women who'd survived by refusing to stay silent. The USB drive I'd placed in evidence had contained everything. Years of meticulous documentation, recordings, photographs, financial trails. Calvin had built his empire on intimidation and isolation. We destroyed it with Excel spreadsheets and smartphone apps. You know what I keep thinking about? Mom said suddenly. That night he hit you. When you came home from May's, if he'd just left it alone, none of this would have happened. It would have happened eventually, May said. Men like Calvin always push too far. They mistake fear for respect, silence for loyalty. My phone buzzed. A notification from the court clerk. Rockwell. Calvin. Plea entered. Guilty. Status: awaiting transfer to Federal Correctional Facility. I showed them the screen. We didn't celebrate. This wasn't that kind of victory. It was simply an ending. Clean, legal, final. Later. I drove past Harvest Chapel one last time. The parking lot was full. Wednesday night services had resumed. Through the windows, I could see people gathering, rebuilding, healing. The sign out front read, "New beginnings, all welcome." Calvin had preached about Judgment Day for 20 years, never understanding he was writing his own revelation. Every stolen dollar, every forged signature, every moment of cruelty dressed up as righteousness. He'd created the evidence that condemned him. The investigation had been thorough. The prosecution, methodical. The justice, complete. No dramatics in the courtroom. No made-for-TV moments, just the slow, grinding wheels of the legal system turning crime into consequence. My last stop was the bank. The teller smiled as she processed the wire transfer. My security deposit for the Portland apartment. Starting fresh? She asked. Something like that. I sat in my car afterward, looking at the restraining order I'd carried for 6 months. Calvin couldn't come near me. But more importantly, I didn't need to go near him, or think about him, or waste another moment of my life on his shadow. The paper shredder at the office supply store made quick work of it. Restraining order, old photos, the last physical reminders of that life. Only the lessons remained. Document everything, trust but verify. Never mistake silence for peace. Tomorrow, I'd drive to Portland, start the new job, build something clean and bright and mine. May would follow in a month. Mom would visit for Christmas. We'd found our way back to each other through the ashes of what Calvin had burned. But tonight, I sat in that parking lot and felt the simple pleasure of a spreadsheet balanced to zero. Every crime cataloged, every debt assigned, every receipt filed where it belonged. Calvin was right about one thing. Judgment Day did come. It just looked like a compliance officer with a USB drive and the courage to plug it in. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing your thoughts. Your experiences and perspectives make this community richer. Until next time, stay strong and keep documenting your truth.